Imagine living in a state that wants to turn its state parks into golf courses for the wealthy, but refuses to rezone agricultural land for single family home construction to help ease the housing crisis that the state is facing. That is the state of Florida. On today's video, we're going to talk about zoning. If you don't know what zoning is, it's the entity that controls land use for an area. Zoning is what makes sure that they don't put a liquor store or a nightclub in your residential community. Nobody would want that. There's a lot of great benefits that we reap as a society by having zoning departments controlling land use. However, in the state of Florida, things have got a little out of hand because today the zoning departments are catering to nothing but the desires of the rich, wealthy, and of course, the interests of developers, while leaving the average person with no options for affordable housing. On today's video, we're going to understand the real reason why there's no affordable housing in Florida. People blame inflation, others blame political administrations. There's really an endless list of reasons people blame for the current housing situation. However, the most obvious nobody mentions. The prime suspect is zoning regulations. Zoning laws dictate whether a property can be agricultural, residential, industrial, or commercial. Currently, over 94% of Florida's population lives in urban areas, but most of the landscape is rural or agricultural. That makes Florida among the most urbanized states in the country. Zoning laws dictate the type of structures that can go into a particular piece of land. As cities grow like they have in Florida, the state would usually allow the rezoning of rural or agricultural land to be used for other purposes. Sadly, in the state of Florida, almost all the rezoning that has taken place has been to benefit builders and developers. If you look at the state of Florida over the last 20 years, the state has done almost zero rezoning of rural or agricultural land for single plot residential housing. That means that the vast majority of residential housing that has gone into the state of Florida has been for commercial purposes, gated communities, and apartment complexes. This has led to growth, but it's led to growth of only more expensive housing units that are usually within HOAs because the land was rezoned from rural or agricultural land to commercial land use. Single plot residential housing is essential for affordability. That is what areas like Lehigh Acres in Fort Myers and Northport in Sarasota have seen so much tremendous growth. Being that single plot residential housing is one of the cheapest options for building, these large areas like Northport and Lehigh Acres have affordable land and thus people can build a home affordably. Unfortunately, these areas have almost zero access to utilities. They're going to be on a septic tank with well water because city services don't reach these areas. Even internet access is fairly difficult to obtain here. And in fact, if you're to look at some of the fastest growing communities in Florida, almost all of them have been areas that are plotted for single family home construction. Lehigh Acres outside of Fort Myers, Northport outside of Sarasota, Port St. Lucie, Citrus Springs. There's a clear correlation between single-family home plots and affordable housing that has led to population growth in these areas. Cape Coral is another prime example. However, these are old grid patterns that were built decades ago in Florida's growth infancy. People are always worried about who's in city council and who the mayors of cities are, but they pay very little attention to what happens in these zoning departments. These zoning departments have become absolutely unreachable to the regular person. They're mostly preoccupied with helping developers rezone agricultural land, and thus, no affordable options hit the market. People will throw fits of anger against their city councils and mayors while paying very little attention to where the problem actually lies, the zoning departments, which have done absolutely nothing throughout the entirety of the state of Florida to allow more single plot residential land available for affordable housing. This concept is simply alien to them. Single family plots are not the only form of affordable housing. For many years, the state of Florida was known as having many mobile home parks. Take the town of Bonita Springs. There used to be a mobile home park that had a marina behind the Kmart. Today, they're building luxury apartments there. In the center of Bonita Springs, there's a beautiful park. Many of the newer residents of Bonita Springs may not know that that newer park had hundreds of mobile homes that were affordable. Somebody who would practically be homeless today back then could affordably rent a mobile home in a mobile home park. However, they've got rid of all these mobile home parks, and today they're used for other purposes. Granted, most of us would agree that in the center of a city, you're much better off having a park than you are a giant crappy mobile home park. But it doesn't change the fact that systematically Bonita Springs has been removing all of the affordable housing options and replacing them with forms of housing or land use that add to land value appreciation. For most cities and municipalities, land appreciation is the goal, and anything that they can do to ensure that their city grows and has higher real estate values, they're going to obtain that. And unfortunately, by getting rid of affordable zoning options, the cities have created a landscape where nothing is affordable anymore. Even when you look at the state of Florida today, the areas that are fastest growing, namely Polk and Marion counties, are the counties that have the most mobile home parks and areas where people can still move into something affordable. These are areas where most of the landscape is dominated by single-family home plots of land, smaller agricultural lots which can still be rezoned for housing options, and there's still a lot of mobile home parks available. Take the case of Lakeland or Plant City or Citrus Springs outside of Ocala. Some of the worst examples are places like Bradenton, Florida, where literally there is no rezoning of anything agriculture for anything other than gated communities, commercial complexes, or luxury apartments. It's created a situation where buying a rundown inner city house in Bradenton in a very bad neighborhood costs almost as much as a new home in the suburbs. Simply the demand for single-family plotted land and homes is so much in this county because all of the new growth is taking place within gated communities. It has created a price appreciation for properties that are single-family homes. It really wouldn't take a genius to figure out that right about now, the county of Manatee needs to rezone agricultural land simply for the purpose of single-family home construction. It simply wouldn't happen. The people who live in the gated communities in the rural areas wouldn't allow that to happen. And thus, part of the problem in Florida is that the wealthy don't allow the poor to have options. They want all the land and all the rezoning to take place for their benefit, but nothing's being done for the average working class person. The wealthy in Florida have become so greedy over land that they're even trying to turn state parks into golf courses for themselves. It's just an absolute monopoly over land use in the state of Florida. All these zoning departments have been bought out by developers, and it's got so corrupt that even the state of Florida is now complicit, engaging in the activities of catering simply to the needs of the rich while trampling the average person's necessities. A lot of people also say, well, part of affordable housing isn't just mobile home parks where we can pack people into cans like sardines and call it a home. Understandable. That really is kind of, well, an eyesore for a lot of these communities. But just about every time we talk about creating affordable housing, there's a lot of pushback. Take Citrus Springs in Citrus County. It's a poor area with an elderly population. This area isn't really desirable. While most of these grid patterns in Florida have grown, the Citrus Springs grid pattern remains vastly empty and frankly undesirable. There has been talk of creating affordable Section 8 housing in Citrus County. It's the perfect place for it. You have access to the Veterans Expressway that goes into Tampa, despite being somewhat of an isolated rural region with very affordable land, and you still have access to Tampa and Orlando. It would seem like the perfect place to put affordable housing, but the residents of Citrus County are in a complete anger frenzy over the notion that Section 8 housing could come to their community, and they fight back. Now, Citrus County has the most affordable grid pattern. It has no real beaches. It has no downtown. It really is an obsolete place. These people are definitely not rich and wealthy. These are the poor, affordable elderly of Florida. They should not have high expectations for their crappy community. However, they refuse to allow affordable housing to go into their county. When even undeveloped crap holes like Citrus Springs refuse to accept affordable housing complexes in their communities, what could be said about larger cities? Nobody wants to have affordable housing in their communities because they believe it will bring down their real estate values and increase crime. However, I live in Lakewood Ranch, a nice suburban area, and last night there was homeless people right outside of my apartment. As law enforcement forces the homeless people out of the city course, now homelessness has become a suburban issue. And places like where I live in the suburbs are getting flooded with homeless people from urban cores. One of the best places to start resolving Florida's affordability issue is by zoning areas away from those developments and gated communities where you actually never get to own the land, because if you have an HOA, you never really own that land yourself. Many of the wealthier people in Florida actually appreciate these HOA fees and actually are happy that it is more expensive to live in these communities, because they feel that the more expensive their communities are, the less likely the riffraff are to move in. So they artificially inflate the value of these properties, especially the HOA fees, to ensure that poor people can't move into their communities. Now, if you're poor and live in a ghetto area or a trailer, please shut your mouth. You don't know what you're talking about. Today, the more affluent people moving to Florida on purpose want their communities to be more expensive, because they feel that the more expensive their community is, the more likely it is to keep out the riffraff. And again, if you're poor, shut your mouth. You don't know what you're talking about. People with money want to pay for safety. And one way that they view they can make their communities safer is by ensuring that these communities are more expensive. And while that might seem like an alien concept to somebody broke like you, it is exactly the mindset that people have when they move to these gated communities. They want to keep people out that can't afford to live in these areas. They feel that the more expensive these communities are, the safer they're going to be. People who have money are willing to do anything to ensure that they are safe. And one of the best tools to ensure that their communities are safe is making sure that they're gated and there's a hefty HOA fee, and that broke people like you can't move in next door to them. They don't want to see you. You're broke, you stink. In the past, the state of Florida had ample options for people looking for affordability. Today, those options are harder to find. Just like many states in the South, in its infancy, the state of Florida had a lot of mobile homes. Today, when you rezone for new construction, they're not going to let you revert back to mobile homes. They're going to force you to build something more expensive. It's kind of like a general understanding that zoning departments in the state of Florida are never going to let you go back to affordable rezoning options. Only the most expensive gated community developments are the ones they approve. Now, the situation in Florida has got even worse these days. Not only do the regular poor people have no options when it comes to looking at the zoning department and what they're doing, but even now these developers are pushing back the buffer zones on mangroves. They're building in environmentally sensitive areas. They're building in flood zones. Even state parks and preserve lands are not out of the grasp of these developers these days in the state of Florida. It's become a free-for-all for the wealthy and developers, and a complete door slam in your face for the average Floridian looking for an affordable place to build a home.